important. Sorry, we're on Zoom as well. Hello to everyone online. We're extremely proud to be publishing this very important book today. So thank you so much for joining us. And we'd also like to thank UCL for hosting us and for their assistance with all the technical aspects, and the Mosaic Foundation for their brilliant work in organising tonight's event. So we're going to be here, I think, for a little over an hour. We're going to hear presentations from the author, who has joined us all the way from Australia. But we're also really grateful to be joined by Sir Laurie Bristow, who, as many of you will know, was the British ambassador to Afghanistan during the fall of the Republic to the Taliban in 2021. So as I say, the event will last a little over an hour. We're going to have about half an hour for presentations and then another half an hour for questions. So do get thinking of anything that you want to ask our speakers in that section. As you likely know, Professor Saikal is one of the world's foremost experts on the history and contemporary politics of Afghanistan, as well as on the American and NATO intervention of the last 2 decades. In this new book, he provides a full account of the last 20 years, beginning with the invasion in the aftermath of 9/11 and ending with the fall of Kabul to the Taliban in the summer of 2021, almost 3 years ago. The book is informed by many insider perspectives and based on many interviews which Professor Saikal has been able to conduct in Afghanistan, in DC, in Europe, all over the world. In particular, he has 2 high-level sources, one on the American side and one in Afghanistan, that are named in the book. These are Carl Eikenberry, the former US ambassador to Afghanistan, and Mahmoud Saikal, the former Afghan special representative to the UN. This insider access enables Professor Saikal to take us behind the scenes of numerous conversations, meetings, and summits, and to provide plenty of previously unseen insights into the inner workings of both domestic Afghan politics and high-level international diplomacy and military strategy, as well as, of course, the very real tragedy on the ground for the ordinary men, women, and children of Afghanistan. To start tonight's event, we're going to hear from Zalmay Nishat, who's the founder and chair of the Mosaic Foundation, who, as I mentioned, have very kindly organised this event with us this evening. The Mosaic Foundation was founded in 2022 with the mission of creating a more equitable and just society for all Afghan people. They strive to promote human rights in Afghanistan, championing the causes of pluralism and diversity in the country. So please welcome Zalmay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe. Good afternoon to all of you in the hall and those who are joining us online through Zoom. Thank you for taking the time to attend our book launch event. It's a real pleasure and delight to see so many familiar faces in the room. On behalf of my colleagues at Mosaic Afghanistan, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming you all to this event. Taking the opportunity, I really would like to thank Sir Laurie Bristow for agreeing to be the main speaker of our book launch today. In addition, special thanks are due to Professor Amin Saikal for coming all the way from Australia to London for the launch of his new book. Finally, I would like to thank James Williams of the Yale University Press for working so hard with us at Mosaic to make this event possible, and from my colleagues at Mosaic, especially Mariam Azizi. Mosaic Afghanistan is pleased to co-host this event with Yale University Press as it aligns with our values of education, progressiveness, and promoting human rights. We believe in educating people through hosting academic conferences, supporting book launches, and fostering progressive dialogues, making this event a true reflection of our commitment to these principles. So in this short opening remarks, I would like to say some words about Mosaic. Mosaic Afghanistan is part of the Mosaic Global Empowerment Foundation, which was incorporated less than 2 years ago as non-for-profit in the UK. Mosaic Afghanistan focuses on 5 main areas in or on Afghanistan. Let me quickly say a few words about each of them. Firstly, as girls in Afghanistan have no rights to education above 6th grade, Mosaic is active in and committed to provision of education to them through both underground schools and with the help of our partners in the country and online. With the generous assistance of UNICEF and the hard work of our partners and staff, we have been teaching hundreds of girls in Afghanistan over the past 1 year. Given the mass radicalization strategy of Taliban through wholesale transformation of school to the madrasa system, it's not only the girls we would like to work with, but also boys as well. We have established a coalition of organizations who are active in provision of education through online and underground schooling. Nevertheless, the overall long-term aim of Mosaic is to work toward an alternative national curriculum which celebrates diversity and pluralism in Afghanistan rather than denying it. A curriculum that promotes human rights, including gender equality, and is fit for the needs of 21st century, including in the area of science and technology. Secondly, since its inception, Mosaic has been part of a dialogue of the civil society of Afghanistan with the aim of amplifying the authentic voices of people of Afghanistan, where the de facto authorities have tried to silence and stifle them. Besides, we are committed to empower the civil society to have a say about the future of the country. To achieve these, we are of the opinion that the civil society needs to organize effectively. For this purpose, Mosaic has been at the forefront of thought leadership on these issues. It has been working on the strategies, how to promote the idea together with the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. We have held an event at the UK Parliament to engage with the UK lawmakers, political parties. Also, together with tens of organizations and hundreds of civil society figures, Mosaic has established the new Afghanistan Democratic Forum. Thirdly, Mosaic advocates and promotes human rights, including women's rights in Afghanistan. We assist women protesters inside and outside the country in their attempt to build consensus that the situation of women and girls in Afghanistan is tantamount to gender apartheid, and to amplify their demand of codification of gender apartheid in international law. Mosaic tries to build capacity of these women by helping them to have a clear strategy, narrative, as well as to connect them with policymakers, lawmakers, think tanks, academics, and etc., in an attempt to amplify their voices. In the UK, we have connected women to the British parliamentary inquiry probing gender apartheid in Afghanistan and Iran. In the future, Mosaic plans to start publishing evidence-based report on human rights situation in Afghanistan based on empirical work on the ground. Fourthly, at Mosaic, we also work towards women economic empowerment. We aim to identify women who used to be the sole breadwinners of their families, either working in the previous government, the private sector, or civil society. Since the Taliban retaking power, however, they lost their means of livelihood. Along with our partners, Mosaic would like to support these women financially, while at the same time provide them with tailored vocational training to enable them to produce handicrafts or goods to sustain themselves. In addition, Mosaic would like to help them to sell these products in European markets. The main objective of this project is economic empowerment of women to make them self-reliant in the long term. Finally, Mosaic runs an annual conference at the University of Cambridge entitled Governance Pathways in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has experienced a century of frequent state breakdowns, each resulting in greater instability and suffering within the country, as well as threatening the security of the wider region. The Taliban's ascendancy in August 2021 and the collapse of the Islamic Republic marked a deterioration in Afghanistan's governance, casting shadows of greater insecurity to the prospect of better government in the country. Therefore, Afghanistan's system of government is in desperate need of a reset. Mosaic's Cambridge Conference series aims to explore pathways to appropriate future governance systems in Afghanistan by providing a platform to academics and experts to think new approaches for Afghanistan's state governance and administrative system that will appropriately consider ground realities of multi-ethnic and socio-politically divided country. It is about reimagining the state of Afghanistan. We hold our conferences every year in the month of September, and so far we have successfully held two of them at the University of Cambridge. The university generously funded the last one for us. We welcome you all to our next conference in early September this year, entitled Inclusivity, Representation, and the Future of the State. It is important to underline that an academic board made up of 13 distinguished scholars, including Professor Amin Saikal, whose books we are unveiling today, regulate the series. Now back to the book launch. I shall suffice to say a few words about the book, and I would like to leave the main speakers, Laurie Bristow and Professor Amin Saikal, to dive deeper in it. I had the pleasure of reading the book, an advanced copy of the book, a few days ago. As a student of politics of Afghanistan and geopolitics, I'm of the opinion that the book comprehensively deals with the history of the 2 decades of Western intervention, taking into consideration the context of the country and the region, and masterfully explains the main reasons behind the ultimate failure of the West in Afghanistan. The book is a necessary read for those interested in the region and global affairs. At this point, I kindly ask Joanna Godfrey, Senior Communication Editor at Yale University Press, to introduce, of course she did introduce, to ask the main speakers to talk about the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Salma. It's such important work that the Foundation does. So I think I'm going to introduce our next 2 speakers together to prevent too much sort of popping up and down. So we're going to hear first from Sir Laurie Bristow, and then from the author, Professor Amin Saikal. So Laurie Bristow joined the United Kingdom Diplomatic Service in 1990 as the Cold War ended and change swept across Europe. His first overseas posting was to Romania in the spring of 1992, where he worked for 3 years during the post-communist transition. Laurie served as ambassador for the United Kingdom 3 times. He was ambassador to Afghanistan during the fall of the Republic to the Taliban in August 2021, and the UK's subsequent evacuation of over 15,000 people from Kabul airports, about which he recently published a book entitled Kabul Final Call, The Inside Story of the Withdrawal from Afghanistan, August 2021. He was the UK's ambassador to Russia from 2016 to 2020, and deputy ambassador to Russia from 2007 to 2010. He was also ambassador to Azerbaijan from 2004 to 2007. In 2020, Laurie worked on the COP26 climate change conference as regional ambassador for China, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia, the Middle East, and North Africa. His other senior roles in London included Director for Eastern Europe and Central Asia and Director for National Security. He was knighted in 2019 for services to British foreign policy. Laurie regularly writes and gives talks about Russia and a broad range of national and international security issues. He is a Distinguished Fellow of the Royal United Services Institute and a Senior Associate Fellow of the European Leadership Network. Our author, Professor Amin Saikal, is Emeritus Professor and Founding Director of the Centre for Arab and Islamic Studies at the Australian National University and Adjunct Professor at the University of Western Australia. Professor Saikal is a specialist in the politics, history, political economy, and international relations of the Middle East and Central Asia, and the role of Islam in these regions. He has been a visiting fellow at Princeton University, Cambridge University, and the Institute of Development Studies at the University of Sussex, a Rockefeller Foundation Fellow in International Relations, and visiting Pan-Asia Distinguished Scholar, Indiana University. In April 2006, he was appointed a member of the Order of Australia for services to the international community and to education, and as an author and advisor. He is an elected fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia, and the author of numerous works on the Middle East, Central Asia, political Islam, and Russia. His books include Iran Rising, The Survival and Future of the Islamic Republic, The Spectre of Afghanistan, Security of Central Asia, and Modern Afghanistan, A History of Struggle and Survival. Professor Saikal has also published many articles in international journals, as well as numerous feature articles in major international newspapers, including the International Herald Tribune. He is also a frequent commentator on radio and television. So I'm going to hand over to Laurie to speak first, and then we'll hear from Professor Saikal. Thank you.
So I passed the first test, which is attaching the mic. Okay, thanks very much, Joanna, for the introduction. Thank you very much, Salma, also for the invitation this evening. Above all, it's a very great honor, actually, to be here to introduce Professor Saikal, Amin Saikal, and his new book. What I think we're going to do is really set out the contrasting perspectives of a very eminent academic and of a practitioner. But essentially what we do between us, I think, will be to converge on a very simple question. How does a big power lose a small war, and in doing so, leave a broken country behind? That's what happened. We're all still trying to make sense of that, why it happened. The reasons, I think, do not entirely make sense. They most certainly shouldn't have happened, but they did. And I think part of the purpose of books like How to Lose a War is to try and ensure that we learn from that and hopefully never do it again. So there are lots and lots of questions embedded in that question, some of them really quite big and difficult: political, strategic, military, also I would say ethical. So what the book does, it sets out, first of all, the historical context, the path to 9/11/2001, and the United States' own history of interventions and small wars. Small, that is, of course, compared to the existential risk of great power conflict and ultimately nuclear war. So the book starts with the 2001 overthrow of the Taliban, the political processes that followed. Part of that story is about the plethora of strategic goals that we were pursuing, some of them in tension with each other, some of them arguably mutually contradictory, some of them frankly unachievable within the constraints of time, resources, internal and external factors within which we were seeking to work. There's also, of course, the question of mission creep, much debated. What were we there to do? From the start, of course, it was about eliminating al-Qaeda and the threat from Osama bin Laden. That came to include building democracy, building a state, countering narcotics, countering insurgency, women's rights. There is a discussion, of course, to have here about how far those things were complementary to each other and how far they got in each other's way. And of course, the very, very big question about the relationship between the intervention in Afghanistan and the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Full disclosure, it wasn't in my biography that Joanna gave, but I worked on the post-conflict planning for Iraq in 2003. There's a whole separate set of questions around the role of the regional powers in particular, but not only Pakistan in all of this. And then there is the question of what happened in Afghanistan itself, the forms of governance that were pursued. And the book is structured around really two eras, the Karzai era, 2001 to 2014, and then the Ashraf Ghani era, 2014 to 2021. Both of them highly dysfunctional, with questionable paths to power, failures to build inclusive political structures and cultures, a high degree of incompetence, and in some cases, predatory behavior. But also an underlying failure to achieve security as the essential foundation on which to build anything at all. There were inconsistent and incoherent strategies, culminating in the Doha Agreement between the Trump administration and the Taliban. In my view, the wrong deal made far too late on the wrong terms for the wrong reasons. And then there were the impacts of the failure on the prestige and the credibility of the United States and its allies at a time of escalating geopolitical tensions. And of course, as President Biden set out repeatedly, that changing international environment was a large part of his decision, not the only part, but a large part of his decision to press ahead with implementing Trump's deal with the Taliban. So some questions. Why did any of this happen? How did we get it so badly wrong? Some personal thoughts for discussion. Why did the 20-year campaign fail? It cannot possibly have been for lack of resources. Depending on what you count, the US and its allies spent north of $2 trillion on that campaign. Vast numbers of lives, huge amounts of political capital. But we created a state and a military that were dependent on us, and they quickly collapsed when the US and allied military left. Why did the US and its allies, including its Afghan allies, never achieve a coherent strategy in Afghanistan? In my view, what Afghanistan demonstrates very clearly is that what are essentially political and societal questions cannot be fixed by military means alone, and they may in fact be made worse by the application of military force. I bring out 4 key drivers of strategic failure. We had a bit of a discussion in Cambridge on this last week. There are, of course, more. My four are, first of all, our support for and reliance on a caste of political leaders who were fractious, factionalized, and in some cases predatory. Second, a counterinsurgency war against the Taliban that was, I would say, guaranteed to alienate many ordinary Afghans from the vast foreign military forces and from the state that they were there to support. Third, a failure to address Pakistan's role in supporting and facilitating the Taliban in pursuit of their policy of strategic depth against India. And fourth, I've already touched on it, the calamitous consequences of the war in Iraq. I'd also add in an overarching one, which is certainly one for policymakers, and I think it's also for academics as well. It's the effects of cognitive biases. Cognitive confirmation bias and optimism bias above all else. The art of seeing what we want to see, not what is actually happening, and our tendency to put the best possible construction on what is happening, disregarding, filtering out less convenient or less flattering interpretations of events. We, I would say primarily the US, but the UK played its role in this too, repeatedly ignored the fact that a political settlement that excluded the Taliban and its supporters would be inherently unstable without that open-ended military commitment to Afghanistan that we did not want to underwrite. Furthermore, an endless counterinsurgency war against the Taliban would inevitably push the country away from stability, not towards it. Only an inclusive political settlement could have created the conditions for the military to leave. That is not what we did. Why did we lose our own publics? So by 2020, we were no longer able to explain to our publics here in the UK or in the US or elsewhere why we were in Afghanistan or what it would take to be able to leave safely. Trump's Doha deal, in my view, is the consequence of this. Its flaws are so obvious and so gross that it only makes sense as a decision to walk away from the problem, regardless of the consequences or costs, which of course are to be paid by others. Why did the Trump administration do such a deal with the Taliban? It was clearly one of the most important causes of the collapse in 2021. It set a timetable for the military to leave, but it did not set binding conditions for such a fundamental change of approach. In doing so, it removed any incentive on the Taliban to negotiate a political settlement, and it pulled the rug out from under the Afghan government and its armed forces. Biden's decision after a short review to press ahead, I think, made the collapse all but inevitable. Two final points. What was the impact on the global standing of the US and its allies at this time of very far-reaching geopolitical turbulence and change? I've been asked a number of times, not least because I'm a Russia specialist, whether the failure in Afghanistan precipitated Putin's decision to invade Ukraine 6 months later. I don't think that was the primary reason. I think there were other things going on, but it certainly didn't help. As a display of the lack of will to protect US interests and prestige, and contributing to a sense that the West is in decline. Last question is, of course, the most important one of all. Now what? What happens now that we have lost this war and that we are dealing with the broken country that's left behind? I would say that we, the UK, the West, still have interests in Afghanistan. Above all, managing the risks to our security that emanate from failed states that harbor violent extremists. The problem, and it's a very, very big one indeed, is that all of our most effective levers for influencing what happens in Afghanistan disappeared, melted away in the collapse of 2021. The Taliban are back in control, despite everything we did between 2001 and 2021. Earlier this year, the UN convened a meeting in Doha to discuss a roadmap towards normalization, produced by Feridun Sinirlioglu, the very capable Turkish diplomat who is the UN Special Coordinator for Afghanistan. Taliban didn't show up. There is, of course, another meeting now being planned. The question I hope that we're going to hear more from Professor Saikal on this evening is, how do we change their behavior now that we have thrown away all of our strongest levers? Thank you.
Good evening and salam alaikum to all. my friends and colleagues from Afghanistan. I'm extremely thankful to Sir Laurie Bristol for giving such an accurate summary of the book. And for that matter, it will also make a very good review of the book. And while also adding some of the important issues towards the end, as you pronounced. First of all, allow me to say a few words about myself, not to boost my ego, but let you know what really brought me to write this book. I am an accidental academic. In my younger days, I had never really thought for a minute that one day I would become an academic, a writer, and therefore a scholar. My burning passion in my younger days was to become a painting in woodcarver. And this is what precisely I did from year 10 to subsidize my family's economic existence. We came from a poor economic background, but an educationally driven family. And then as things happened, at the age of 16 or 16 and a half, I got a scholarship to go to the United States for a year, to spend a year with an American family, do final year high school, and also learn English, which was at that time was extremely poor and continues to be so. And I recall that I was invited to address the Sunday school in a Presbyterian church after 2 weeks of arrival in the United States. And since I had never really knew much about Sunday school, I thought it might be something really good to learn about it. So I attended it because I was living in a family who had 4 sons, Terry, Larry, Jerry, Gary. Their father's name was Harold and called Harry. So I went to school. Before I left Afghanistan, I was told that Americans would be very much interested in learning about your country. Since my English was really poor, I memorized a brilliant short article about Afghanistan. So when I went to the Sunday school, the teacher said, boys and girls, we have a guest from a faraway country. It's called Afghanistan. And we would like to invite him to say a few words about his country. But I would like to remind you that his English is not his native language. And therefore you have to be very patient and listen very carefully. So I got up, I closed my eyes, opened my mouth, and recited the essay in perfect English. And afterwards, the teacher said, I'm sorry, boys and girls, and I'm sorry to Mr. Saikal. To Mr. Saikal, I didn't know that his English is so good. And then they said, would you like any questions? And one of the guys raised his hand and said, yes. What's Afghanistan's view of NATO? I had never heard of NATO. And of course, that's when they found out that I was useless. I could not possibly answer their questions. But just that question, that, what's Afghanistan's view of NATO, sort of alerted me to go a bit deeper into learning about the world. And as a result, when I returned, I really wanted to become a journalist. That was my real passion. I started writing short articles for some of the newspapers in Kabul, including the Kabul Times, used to have a student page. And that's when also, just for the benefit of my Afghan friends, I got to know a famous Afghan localist by the name of Ahmad Zahir. We became very close friends. And then after that, I got a scholarship and went to Australia. But I wanted to do journalism. And of course, no Australian university was offering a degree in journalism. They were offering diploma in journalism, but not degree. But I wanted a degree because diploma didn't really mean much in Afghanistan. You had to have a degree. And so finally, I was advised that perhaps the next best thing you can do is political science, history, Asian studies. And that's how I got into political science and international relations. And of course, the rest of it is history. And I then basically started becoming sort of an academic, but was all accidental. Now, what motivated me to write this book? I mean, I've been focused. My original book was about Iran, which was published by Princeton University Press, called The Rise and Fall of the Shah. And my focus was very much on the Middle East. But with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, I found myself compelled also to focus on Afghanistan. And as a result, the first major book that I produced was Modern Afghanistan, A History of Struggle and Survival. And then I continued to write about Afghanistan and publish about Afghanistan, but along with a number of, covering a number of other issues across the Middle East and Central Asia. After a US-led intervention, I tried to work out whether Afghanistan is a country that actually can be tamed by any power, or it is a country that is often trying to tame those countries out of their skin. And looking at back at the Afghan history, from the time of its foundation, I'm talking about modern Afghanistan, no major power has succeeded in taming the country according its ideological or geopolitical interests. The British couldn't do it. The Soviets couldn't do it. But this time, when the United States intervened, actually, at the beginning, I was quite hopeful, but with a degree of academic naivety. I thought that perhaps the prayers of the Afghans had been finally answered with the 9/11. And that brought the United States, a power that had never really probably thought, no American leaders ever really thought that one day they will have 100,000 troops in Afghanistan and their allies, another 47,000 troops in the country, and fighting a Taliban-led insurgency. So as a result, I continued to think about Afghanistan and what American intervention is going to unfold. But at the same time, I had some knowledge of American intervention in Vietnam, and then subsequently American intervention in Iraq. And I knew that probably the Americans are really good in making wars, but probably not that good in bringing peace. And I became very concerned about the way the situation unfolded in the country. And at one point, in fact, as far back as 2006, I came to the conclusion that Afghanistan was heading in the wrong direction. After having interacted with a number of Afghan leaders, ordinary Afghans, spending time visiting again Afghanistan a few times, I published a piece in the International Herald Tribune in which I argued that we are really, Afghanistan is heading in the wrong direction. This is not going to really bring peace to the country. And well, it became very clear from that time, from 2006, that the United States and its allies had faced a number of fundamental problems in Afghanistan that they would not be able to overcome. One was that they didn't have actually a clear strategy with an end game. Their involvement in Afghanistan was a knee-jerk reaction, as it was also subsequently in the case of Iraq. And the second thing was that the political system that unfolded in the country just simply was alien to the historical and prevailing conditions in Afghanistan. And the leaders that system produced proved to be very ineffective and incompetent. And of course, they presided over a thoroughly corrupt administrations. I recall that I was in Kabul, had a long discussion one night with Dr. Abdullah. At that time, I had several discussions with him. And I met Hamid Karzai, Ashraf Ghani. And I recall that that night that I had a long discussion with Dr. Abdullah, I came to the conclusion that Abdullah was a really nice man. He was a man of the people, but he's not the sort of individual who can really run a country. He would be good in terms of being a figurehead, but not somebody who could make decisive decisions and lead the country in a direction which is absolutely needed. Hamid Karzai, I had a meeting with him, and I found out a very nice man, of course, taking over the leadership in a very difficult time. I was very hopeful in 2002 when I met him that he would now actually open a new chapter in Afghan history. He would not pursue the practices and the ideals that have prevented Afghanistan in the past from consolidating as a viable state. As it turned out, President Karzai, I think at the end he ended up as a Pashtun Khan, basically repeating what Afghan rulers had done in the past. Most of the government appointments took place in relationship to various members of family, ethnic groups, factional groups, and so on. Qualifications were not one of the most important criteria for making those appointments. Well, some people will say, well, there was a very limited pool of educated people at the time. It is true. But I thought that he needed not to surround himself with political and ethnic entrepreneurs. This is what he did. And of course, Ashraf Ghani, when I met him a few times, and I discovered that he's more, and I have to be very frank, that it was more about himself rather than what was really going on in the country, how to hold on to power. That was the most, how to get power and how to really hold on to power. So quite a number of books have been published by seasoned scholars and observers of Afghanistan over the last many years. I must say that I'm very thankful to Sir Rory Bristow for the book that he has written. I desperately tried to find a copy of it today, but it wasn't available in the bookshop that we went to. And I think that this book of mine will have to be read, those of you who are interested, and companion with Sir Rory's book. I think it is very important. But in the books and the literature that's come out on Afghanistan, I increasingly noticed that there are certain critical gaps which did not really explain why the Americans failed in Afghanistan. And as Sir Rory has already summarized it, I gathered that one of the things that really led the United States to deepen and widen its involvement in the country was based on the first mistake that the Americans made. And that was not to be able to capture bin Laden and his main operatives, simply because they did not allow their own forces to go and pursue bin Laden, but rather they relied on an Afghan warlord whose forces were not, he was not very reliable, his forces were not well equipped, and of course at the end, bin Laden, people bribed him, and he let bin Laden and his operatives to slip across into Pakistan. And that's when, as Ambassador Carl Eikenberry relates, the so-called hunt for bin Laden started. The longer this hunt for bin Laden went on, the more United States involvement got deeper and wider in the country. And it took 11 years. By the time that they captured bin Laden and killed bin Laden, Afghanistan, the Taliban-led insurgency was in full swing in the country, right across the country. It was too late. President Obama came to the conclusion that, no, we are involved in an unwinnable war. He reviewed America's Afghanistan policy in order to, basically what I saw, to Afghanize the war. The Soviets had tried it before. The Americans had tried it in Vietnam before. And in both cases, they had failed. But this Afghanization of them could not possibly succeed. I mean, the other thing is that, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, the United States could not really secure the kind of Afghan partners who could be very effective and acting as the mechanisms of control on the ground. And of course, the Americans also. This is a strategy. Why didn't the United States and its allies go for Taliban bases in Pakistan? They knew where the Taliban Shura was in Quetta, the capital of Balochistan. They knew where their bases were. They knew that, you know, all the border crossings, you know, from where they came through. They were fully aware that the Pakistan military intelligence, ISI, and Pakistan military were absolutely committed to the Taliban. But they didn't go. after those targets? Well, there are good reasons. I mean, one, most of American war supplies was coming through Pakistan and Afghanistan. I mean, the second thing was that United States policymakers were very concerned about the situation in Pakistan itself, which was incredibly politically, economically, and socially fragile. Yet at the same time, Pakistan is a nuclear armed state. The question was, the point was that if we put too much pressure on Pakistan, will the country implode? And if it does implode, who's going to inherit those nuclear weapons? Will they fall into the hands of wrong people? So there are a number of considerations that restrain the United States from actually, going after the main targets, rather than bombing villages after villages in Afghanistan in order to contain the Taliban. But the more you bomb, the more you violate the codes of honor of the Afghans and the rest of it, the more enemies you create. And that's what really happened. So then there's the whole question of the strategy, American strategy. I mean, the training, just as an example, the training of Afghan armed forces, it was done in patchwork. Different members of the US alliance took on the training of different parts of the Afghan armed forces. They brought in their own cultures, which was different from one another altogether. And then, of course, there's the question, the issue that they didn't have enough ammunition. There was shortage of weapons. There was a lot of corruptions in the armed forces or the security forces, and there are a lot of desertion, and including ghost soldiers. People inflated the number of Afghan troops by those who were in command in order to fill their own pockets. And that's what precisely happened. I was in 2009 in Dubai, and I was sitting and discussing the global financial crisis with some of my Emirati friends. And they looked at me and said, Amin, we are very thankful to the Afghans. I said, why? He said, they saved us from the global financial crisis. Millions and millions of dollars were flown from Afghanistan and invested in Dubai. And of course, also in other parts of the Middle East. I don't want to really go on, and I think for details of all this, I do strongly urge you to, those of you who are interested, to read the book. And there is a lot of new material in the book, and for that matter, eyewitness account in the book. But I would like to sincerely thank a number of people without whose cooperation, friendship, and concerns about Afghanistan, I would have not been able to complete this book and, of course, reach it to the point of being launched today. Well, first of all, I am extremely thankful to Sir Laurie for the time that he's taken. I know he's a very busy person, and it's extremely kind of him to come all the way from Cambridge and with a number of other friends to launch this book. And I'm very thankful to Yale University Press and that organized this launch in partnership with Mosaic Afghanistan. And I'm very also thankful to Mr. Zalmay Nishot for that. Further, I'm extremely indebted to Joanna Godfrey, the senior acquisition editor of Yale University Press. She's been so patient with me. We've had a number of Zoom discussions, and at times I've been very desperate that how am I going to really possibly finish this book, because there was also a very difficult time because one of my youngest sister had cancer and she died of cancer. So it's all happened in the middle of this. And further, I'm also very thankful to Rachel Lonsdale, who's the managing editor. She was extremely helpful and acting with speed on everything and being incredibly punctual. And Lucy Buchan, I think is that how it's pronounced, and she was a copy editor. This book was read several times. Joanna read it, and with very skilled editing, sent it back to me. And then, of course, it had been sent to 2 readers, and their comments came back. And at the same time, also, it was read by a very close friend and colleague from Australian National University, the former Deputy Vice Chancellor of the ANU, Malcolm Dries, who was also a Vice Chancellor of 2 universities here at the City University of London and also Metropolitan University. Further, I'm so grateful to James Williams. He's been so helpful from the time that we think that this book was going to come out, and he really has been on the job and trying to publicize it as much as possible, and also for participating in organizing this event. Well, but last but not least, my suffering wife, Marie-Louise Hickey, without whose support and editing skills, this work would have not become readable. Sorry? And the best editor in the world, and the best partner in the world. And of course, I mean, she doesn't want me to use this word, but I will use it once again. She's been a rock behind every piece of work that I have produced. And without her love and care, I would have not been able to do that. So thank you very much to all of you for coming. And I hope you will have an opportunity to get a copy of the book, although I understand that James is giving a big discount tonight. Or whether you read it now or you read it later, or you borrow a copy from your library. And I hope very much that you will. It's not a book to enjoy, but it's a book to make you think about why the Americans failed and where Afghanistan is left today as a broken country. Thank you very much. Many thanks.
We'll change the camera angle.
Okay.
We'll use this for the questions.
Right.
Share that.
Great. We're just going to have a couple of minutes break now, and then we will come back for some Q&A. There are a few bottles of water at the back if anyone wants to grab one of those. But we'll be back with Q&A very, very shortly. Oh, brilliant. That was brilliant. Yeah.
Can you announce to people when they can buy the book?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'll go. There we go. Hi, everyone. Right, we're going to get started again with some Q&A. So if anyone has any questions for Professor Saikal or for Laurie about the history or the contemporary situation, I can see we've got one right at the front already. I think we have got a roving microphone that's coming round. So we'll do the gentleman in the navy jacket and then the gentleman behind him after that. So we've got 2 questions.
Sorry, please kindly take your seats.
If everyone could just take a seat, we'll do 15 minutes or so of Q&A, and then we can have the book sales after that and more time for conversation. So we'll just do a little bit more Q&A. Yes, yeah, if you just speak loudly. I think the microphone is stuck. Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Oh. No. There we go. No, there we go. Oh yeah.
Oh, yes, it is. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Lauri and Professor Saikal. It was really a great insight, I guess, to the situation, what happened. But I have two questions, one for you, Lauri, if it's possible, and one for Amin. Perhaps, I can start with Amin. So, I mean, you already went to Afghanistan, you discussed, you talked to Abdullah, to, Karzai, to Ghani, and you have your, basically they made a kind of impression, who they are and how they look at the country. And of course, the politics around the world. But then in Afghanistan, you also had the political elites, right? So we call Nukhba Ghani Siyasi, political elites. So, I mean, you had the political elites, in diaspora. They live outside in a way, connected to the situation there. So you had the political elites. So, I mean, why or how the political elites failed in a way to step in and you can say prevent some of the things that these leaders would do. So this is one question, perhaps a little bit hot question. So my question for Lauri is that now the image of the West in general and America in particular as the global power hegemon, keeps law and order around the world, that's largely, we can say collapsed. So if we be a little bit harsh, like really it's destroyed in a way. So if America or the West in a way with what is happening now in Ukraine, with Taiwan's coming up, China, all these things, wants to bring back that image or wants to, or wishes even to, to think that they can restore that image that is started by the failure in Afghanistan 3 years ago. What are the implications? What could be done? So yeah, something to think about.
Well, thank you very much. I expected you to ask the most difficult question. I think your question is that why the elite did not really prevent and the rulers from making a mess of things in the country. I mean, if you look at the history of Afghanistan, every ruler has done his best to ensure those people are around them that you're totally loyal to him. Afghanistan history is essentially made by rulers and their elites. But at the same time, in many cases, the elites have been divided. They have factionalized. And they have also been rivals to one another. But at the same time, in order to be able to benefit from all the perks which are available to them, they've tried to support the ruler to hold on to power for as long as possible. But when they have come to the point that no, actually the ruler has now grown too big for his shoes, or they're not really taking our views and our wishes on board, that's when then they have acted. I mean, for example, we know, and the case of, for example, the communist elite that came to power, the two main factions, the Persian and Khalq. This politics of dualism has persistently taken the heart out of stability in Afghanistan. This was the case during Zahir Shah. You had the rivalry between Zahir Shah and his cousin Dawood Khan. You had the rivalry between the Persians and the Khalq. You had even rivalry within the Khalq faction between Najib and Tanai, his defense minister. And then you go back and you look at the period of Amanullah. He had to first suppress his brother and his uncle before he could take over the reins. And then you go further back and you find that the same sort of thing, that's been one of the underlying factor of instability and volatility in Afghanistan over a long period of time. But I can also assure you, just in one word, that the Taliban are going to face the same sort of problem. The problem is going to come from within, just as pressure will come from inside Afghanistan, but from among themselves.
Shall I have a go at
Yes,
answering the second?
absolutely,
You okay with the mic?
Yes. Between you.
Thank you. Look, I'll be very brief because I mean the first thing I want to say I think picks up very nicely from what Professor Saikal was saying. So approaching this from the perspective of a practitioner, not an academic, I'm drawn again and again back to the point about what you need as a practitioner is access to expertise and evidence. Sometimes I think governments like to behave as if they don't actually need those things. Well, the bad news is you do. And you need to find ways of seeking them out from the academic community and others. For this very, very simple reason, diplomacy isn't only about what you want, it's about what the other side wants as well. And working out what are the alignments in there, but also what are the disalignments and what you're going to do about them. And if you don't have an accurate reading on what your opponents and allies think, what they want, you're not going to get there. I mean, it's really, really simple. Second point related to that is it's about challenge. So I touched in my opening remarks about just believing what you want to believe rather than what is actually happening. I mean, a big part of the purpose of the expert community is to help you understand, are you actually reading this right? Are you reading this correctly? If the answer is no, you're in big, big trouble. And I think all of those in the room who've done policy and government type jobs will understand just how badly wrong you can get it. Just to illustrate that very briefly, in my meetings in the final weeks with the leadership in Kabul, quite a lot of what I was trying to do was work out what on earth are they doing? What are they up to? Because I won't name names, I do to some extent in my own account of those weeks. It was really hard to work out what their take was on the situation and whether that they were all actually on the same page or there were some other things going on. Second point, more general one to Riz's question. Look, a very senior European Union official said to me some years ago, success goes to those who know what they want. A pretty basic rule of life, I would say. And in this case, of course, the Taliban knew perfectly well what they wanted, but also they were prepared to do what was necessary to achieve it. We were not clear, I think, what we wanted for reasons set out in the book, and we were not prepared to do what it took to achieve it over the timescale. So my very final point on this, I wrote a rather polemical article for the Institute of Arts and Ideas about a month ago, which was, the gist of it was, let us please not again make the same mistake over Ukraine that we made over Afghanistan. The stakes are even higher for us in Ukraine. This, of course, was at the time of the goings on in the US Congress over the supplemental package, the $61 billion support for Ukraine. If we believe that Ukraine matters to us, let's behave as if Ukraine matters to us.
So much.
Hi, thank you very much, everyone. So my question is, actually after 9/11, the Americans entered into Afghanistan, and then the Bonn conference happened where the future of Afghanistan was being decided. And so my question is, why was it not considered to reestablish the monarchy? That's a simple question. I mean, everybody was talking about the Islamic Republic, and I mean, first the interim government and then the transition to the Islamic Republic. Yeah, that's all.
Your question is that why they did not reestablish the monarchy? That's a very good question. Zalmay Khalilzad claims that he discussed it with Zahir Shah to take over the leadership, but he was reluctant. And he decided not to. I had a long meeting in Bonn years ago with Zahir Shah's son, Mir Weiss. God bless his soul, he died a couple of years ago. He told me that no, my father was forced by Zarmai Khalilzad and some of his colleagues to withdraw in favor of Hamid Karzai, because the Americans, they had more trust in Karzai. And of course, Zahir Shah was old. By the time he came to Afghanistan, he was already in his late 80s. And when he died, he was 96. And I think that may have also been a consideration in the calculation of the American delegation. So, but I think many seasoned observers of Afghanistan state that it would have been really good if Zahir Shah had taken over the leadership. He was actually persuaded to take over the leadership because he was still some symbol of national unity. People still really look back to the Zahir Shah's period because after 20 years of warfare and killings and violence and so on, they thought that the Zahir Shah's period was still a golden age. And of course, there was a period of relative stability and security in Afghanistan. But of course, that didn't happen. And yet another opportunity was missed. The Afghans have never been as good as missing opportunities. And they missed so many opportunities. And I think that is another aspect of the Afghan tragedy.
I'm just in the red picture.
Thank you for the organizers of this event. Although there's a lot going on in the world, it's good to be reminded that Afghanistan remains a complex topic for the world. And it was very good to listen to both of you to give your insight and your analysis on what really happened in the last 20 years in Afghanistan. I was one of the Afghans who was part of the Western project of bringing stability and democracy to Afghanistan. I worked with the ambassadors like Richard Stagg, I worked with William Patey, and I also advised Lieutenant General Tim Bradford in how to operate militarily in Helmand province. My question is, the US in 2001 had a conference in Bern, Germany with the same field elements that you mentioned in your speech to bring an unelected government on the Afghan people. And the West in particular, the America, they combined anger with a lack of understanding of that part of the world, and they rushed into military war. So is the win or the loss of the West really the win or the loss of the Afghans? Why is it, you call it now a loss or a win, that it costed Afghans 20 years of misery? I mean, Grant Shapps, the defense secretary of the conservative government, last month, he said that we don't want to leave Ukraine alone because the order of the globe will fall apart. The West will fall apart. Do you not think that the West is interventionist and this whole project as a whole was a failure, and that loss and the win of the West does not have to do anything with the loss or win of the Afghans? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think, I mean, your comments, really illustrate for the audience, the scale of what happened here, for individuals as well as for a country. And I think all of us who lived through the events of 2021, feel that. What can I usually say about this? I mean, hindsight is a wonderful thing. In different ways, I think what we saw in both Afghanistan and Iraq was the necessity and the extreme difficulty when you are essentially an occupying power to create the conditions for the emergence of new governance structures that have some degree of legitimacy, I would be the first to agree that we didn't get it right in either case. And that for me is the thing that we most need to learn from. If you're going to do these interventions, what happens in the post-conflict phase? We've got it wrong numerous times. As a more practical proposition, if you believe, as I do, that a stable, lasting political settlement has to bring in a plurality of voices and parts of society, as a basic negotiating technique, if that's what you're going to do your negotiations when you are strong and not under time pressure, and the people opposed to you are not strong and are under time pressure. What Doha does is exactly the opposite of that, which is why I think it was such a bad deal. As I said, the wrong deal at the wrong time, for I think almost certainly the wrong reasons. But the last point I would make, and I should pass over to Amin Saikal, who knows far more about Afghanistan than I do. It's also it's the art of the possible. What are the limits of what you're trying to achieve here? How do the pieces fit together? I think the thing that we would all of us who've worked on this as a political thing have had to come to terms with is we did not know enough about the country that we were working in. That is on us, and I think it comes back to my point about using expertise, using challenge.
No, I agree with that. And I think as former American Secretary of State Robert Gates states in his memoir, which was published in 2014, that he basically virtually saying that we walked into Afghanistan blindly and we're going to walk out of the country blindly. And I think that just about sums up, the whole American involvement in the country.
We're running a bit short on time. Do we have any questions online? No. Okay, so we're going to take these three. We've got one at the back. Yeah, one at the back, and then these three. We're going to take them all together, and then we'll leave our speakers to wrap up and address as many as they can.
Salam, everyone. Yeah, first of all, congratulations on your new book. Yeah, I'm much interested to read it, but before reading from the title and from your speech, it seems that it emphasizes on the previous regimes or governments of Afghanistan, why they lost. But the question that I have, or something that I think, is that the war is not ended yet. Still, we entered a new phase of war in Afghanistan since 2021. Yeah, for sure, it was pillar of democracy and Republic of Afghanistan, but there is another battle or war between people of Afghanistan, the Taliban, as an insurgent group. So what would be your suggestion, or how can we succeed this war, or how may Taliban lose this current war? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
So in the orangey red here, navy, and then okay, we'll see how many we can take one go.
Thank you very much. My name is Sarojdin Isar. I'm a research fellow at Radboud University, Netherlands. Very fantastic insights, Professor Saikal, and I'm so glad to meet you personally, finally. So I just had a quick look at the book, and I was hoping that you could talk a little bit more about the book. But I'm sure that you wanted us to buy the book, definitely, which we will do, of course. In the book, you stated for Karzai, as well as Ghani, when making a distinction both as dysfunctional governance. When you talk about the dysfunctionality of governance, what do you kind of refer to, and how distinctive these two governments were in terms of dysfunctionality? Because my understanding is for Karzai, it was way different than the type of the governance that we experienced under Ghani. Ghani, like what you rightly stated, was so much into power, over-centralizing power, but Karzai was the opposite. He did not centralize the power as much as Ghani was. So I just would like to hear more about you, the kind of dysfunctionality of the governance that you were referring to, both in the same thing. How different are they? Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kaihan and I study Master of Anthropology here at UCL. So my question might go a bit deep to the roots. So why US and UK following the suit and Western allies in generally have this tendency to act as a big brother all over the world, like to give themselves this right that we're going to save you. And in fact, it turned out to be different. So what gives them this right to act as a big brother? And then if you go a bit deeper, if Russia invaded Afghanistan, Afghans didn't have any means to fight, except we had 2 legs and 2 hands just to walk and shake hands. That's everything we had. And you're giving me everything to fight this big guy, and doesn't matter how much I get hurt back, so I don't care about that. And 20 years later, I'm coming there, my presence is there. What justifies that presence then? Thank you.
The question is addressed to Ambassador. What the factor of tribal? Okay. Yeah. Tribal affiliation. So probably, you know, when in Afghanistan the war started, when the Russian went to Afghanistan, it didn't go there to fight the Muslims. In fact, they went to remove a communist leader, Afzal Amin. And one of Afghanistan leaders, Mr. Badakhshi, who was killed later on by Afzal Amin, he told him that you people, you have tribal mentality. Afghanistan can never be built by people who have tribal mentality. What happened in Afghanistan, that factor kept Afghanistan 300 years backward. The people who were ruling Afghanistan once it was the hub of civilization, Balkh civilization, Ghor civilization. So in the last 300 years, if you look at Afghanistan, it went backward because a tribal way of life is a very primitive way of life. And what we had, in fact, in Afghanistan in the last 20 years, 3 people, but the same tribal mentality, Mr. Karzai, Mr. Ahmad Zai, Khalilzad, they were in power, they were making decisions, and to them, Taliban was not an enemy. They were their tribal brothers. In fact, Mr. Karzai did his best to give them legitimacy. Mr. Ahmad Zai did his best to release them from prison. Thousands of boys from Northern Alliance died to capture those prisoners. They put them in prison. He in fact released them. Mr. Khalilzad, in fact, it was his aim to bring Taliban back. I remember in those days, even to give them legitimacy. So what the people of Afghanistan want to know, how can we live with the people with that sort of mindset? Why we should suffer? Tribal mentality is something belong to Pashtun, Tajiks, Hazara, Uzbeks, they don't have it. Why do we have to suffer another 300 years, live in a backward way of life that Taliban brought? They are product of that backward tribal mentality. What we should do about it, we should come up with a solution.
Okay, so we had 4 questions there. We had the question just now about the tribal affiliations and tribal mentality. We had the West as big brother and getting involved in lots of different conflicts. We had a question to learn more about the personality of the Karzai government. And we had a question about the future, really. How do we succeed next time with this new phase of the war that we're seeing now, which is probably quite a good one to end on. So I will leave it to both of you to see which of those you'd like to answer and any final sort of summarizing thoughts.
Well, you just need to read this book together. Together with Sarori's book, then it's all covered. Yes, I think a question at the back about you know what's going to happen now. I find the situation extremely grim. I don't expect peace returning to Afghanistan soon. Afghanistan is in the grip of a long-term structural instability and insecurity. It's going to take another generation or 2 generations or 3 generations before Afghanistan could recover even from what has happened in the last 40 or 43 years or so. I think in the first instance, if the Taliban don't change their way, and they don't try to come to terms with other minorities in Afghanistan, and of course, half of the population of the country, that's the women and girls of the country, then I think you're going to get growing internal resistance, as well as armed groups operating from outside. That has already begun. And they're engaged in a hit and run operations. So if the Taliban don't change, then the only other option is to make sure that they're blasted out. And that's not an easy task either. You know, there is a Malawi's poem. I will say it in Persian and then translate it. میگه خمهاست از این بالا، خمهاست از آن بالا، تا نشکنی این خم را هرگز نچشی آن را. There are, of course, he's talking about tasawwur. There are jars of this one, and there are jars of that one. Until you don't break this jar, you're not going to be able to taste the other jar. So now Afghanistan is precisely located in that situation. Should one jar broken in order to be able to taste the other jar? Or is there any possibility that the two sides could come together and reach an understanding for the sake of the country and for the future of the country?
Thank you. I'm inclined just to say all of that, but let me just try and add a few comments in case you. So first of all, what I particularly want to pick up is what did we learn from the Soviet intervention and its failure in Afghanistan? So about 15 years ago, I was in Moscow and I took a parliamentary delegation from the UK to see General Gromov. It was the height of the Obama surge. General Gromov, of course, was the commander of the Soviet 14th Army, the last man across the Friendship Bridge when the Soviets pulled out. So he turned up in his uniform, great big hat. He has the kind of voice that it takes a lifetime of vodka and cigarettes to acquire. He went through a very, very long list of the mistakes that the Soviet Union had made in Afghanistan. Then he paused, looked at me with a half grin, and started on our list of mistakes that we were making in Afghanistan, and we didn't listen. You know, this is, I think, a really important point here about humility. Second point I wanted to make, it's about liberal interventionism. The whole books are being written about the failures of liberal interventionism. Some of us may one day write our own. I mean, I think maybe the most useful thing I can say here is remember Clausewitz. You know, war is the continuation of policy by other means. It is, if your policy does not make sense, war will not get you there. You know, when you are conducting military operations, you need to think not only about the operation itself, but what do you want to happen? What is the path to peace? How are you going to get there? And that seems to me to be the, you know, the question that runs all through Professor Saikal's book, my own book, books being written by others. The problem is we didn't have good answers to those questions. My third point, the conflict hasn't ended. It most certainly hasn't ended. And the consequences of that will be coming for many, many years, I would say generations. But I think there is just one tiny, tiny thing to hold on to here, which is what people know that they did not know 20 years ago. And one thing that I really cannot leave the conversation without just saying a few words about, it's about women and girls. So I did an event in Cambridge a few months ago with Zara Joya. Many of you here will know her. Most of you will know who she is. She made the very, very obvious and compelling point that if you're not educating girls, you're not educating boys either. And if you're not educating your children, the country has no future. So I think for people like us, it's making sure that people like Zara have the space to put that argument across and over time win it.
Great, thank you so much. I'm afraid we are out of time. I know, I'm very sorry. I know there were many more questions, but we do have to be out the room in about 15 minutes. So we've got a little bit more time so we can talk to each other, talk to the speakers. The book is on sale at the back. It is 30% off, which means that it is £13.29 today only. There are flyers, so you can take flyers away and buy it at the same price. But please, just before we go, let's give a big round of applause to our speakers. Thank you so much.